Some people believe miracles are a thing of the past. Others say that when medicine fails, all that's left is empty hope. But I lived the opposite. I saw my daughter on the edge of death. I heard a doctor say, "There's nothing else we can do." And still, something impossible happened. It was right there, when everything pointed to the end, that God chose to write a brand new beginning. My name is Daisy Jennings. I'm 44 years old, from Tallahassee, Florida, and I'm the mother of June, a 9-year-old girl who runs, sings, and smiles today, but who came within inches of not surviving. I work as a teacher's aide in a public school and live a simple life. I've always had faith, but what happened with my daughter shook everything I thought I knew about prayer, about God, and even about myself. This story isn't for those looking for easy answers. It's for the ones lying awake at night, drowning in silence, wondering why God feels so far away in the middle of pain. I've been there. But I've also seen heaven break through inside a hospital room when no one else believed. And today, I need to tell you, no matter the diagnosis, no matter how desperate it feels, God still performs miracles. If you're a parent, or if you've ever loved someone so much you'd take their place in a heartbeat, then you'll understand what this story holds. All I ask is this: listen to the end, because maybe the miracle you've been waiting for starts right here. Before everything happened, my life was simple, but full of meaning. I used to wake up early to the sound of birds singing, make coffee while Daniel read a passage from the Bible, and our daughter June, still half asleep, would mess up her hair in that adorable way kids do. We had the kind of routine some people might call boring, but to me, it felt like a little piece of heaven. On Sundays, we always sat in the same church pew, right side, where the stained glass window cast light across June's face during worship. My heart was at peace, watching my family serve God with joy. I worked part-time as a reading assistant at a preschool, while Daniel stayed steady in his job as a refrigeration technician. We weren't wealthy by the world's standards, but we were rich in what truly mattered: love, health, and faith. Our local church felt like a second home, warm, welcoming, full of real friendships and prayers that wrapped around you like a hug. Our pastor, George Warren, used to say, "Those who plant faith will reap miracles." Back then, I believed that with the same certainty I believed the sun would rise every morning. June was always a bright, joyful, and deeply spiritual little girl. She loved writing down prayer requests in her notebook, even for people she didn't know. She'd hear names mentioned during church and quietly jot them down to pray for later. I thought it was sweet at the time, but now I see God was already preparing something inside us. In our home, faith wasn't just something we talked about, it was something we lived. Holding hands, praying before meals, laughing even on hard days. It felt like everything was just as it should be. But it's strange how calm often comes before the storm. And no matter how much we love our routines, it only takes one small shift for the ground to fall out from under us. I didn't know it yet, but our peaceful days were numbered. And it was during one of those ordinary breakfasts, between buttered toast and warm milk, that something small began to catch my attention. It all started so subtly that if I didn't know my daughter so well, I might have brushed it off. June, who was always cheerful and talkative in the mornings, began to grow quieter. At first, it was just a little headache here, a bit of dizziness there. Then came the nausea, the pale skin, and a tiredness that didn't make sense. I kept trying to explain it away. Maybe it was the heat, maybe a cold, maybe just one of those things kids go through. But mothers know. We sense what others can't see. When June asked to stay home from school for the third time in 1 week, I felt a knot tighten in my chest. Something wasn't right, and I knew it. I started watching more closely. She stopped playing with the dog, left her violin untouched, and even the worship songs she used to hum in her room went silent. There was a cloud in her eyes I'd never seen before. I remember one afternoon especially. We were in the living room, she was holding a book, but her eyes weren't on the page. They were far off, like her mind was somewhere else. I asked her what she was feeling, and she said, "I'm tired, Mommy, but I don't know why." Right then, something in me woke up. This wasn't normal tiredness. Her body was trying to tell us something. That night, I knelt by my bed and prayed, "Lord, if there's something hidden, reveal it. Don't let me miss the signs." It didn't take long for the answer to come, and it shook us out of our comfort zone. A sudden episode at school forced us to take her to the hospital. What started out as just another ordinary day turned into the beginning of a journey no parent is ever truly prepared to face. It was on a cloudy Tuesday morning that everything started to change. June had a sudden drop in blood pressure at school, and by protocol, the administration called me. When I arrived, she was lying in the nurse's office, cold to the touch, her eyes distant. Deep down, something in me was already screaming that this wasn't normal. I scooped her up in my arms like she was 3 years old again, and we headed straight to the hospital. They took her in quickly, but I could see the doctors' faces shifting as the test results came in. Dr. Brooks, who usually had such a calm tone, came in with a furrowed brow and a serious look in his eyes. He ordered more tests, more specific ones, with an urgency that made me feel uneasy. I sat in the waiting room with Daniel, trying to hide the fear, but our hands were shaking. That hospital, which once felt like a place of care and comfort, now seemed like a maze of unknowns. The next few hours were a whirlwind. X-rays, scans, blood work. June, so small, surrounded by so many machines. I smiled at her, but inside I was crying out to God for mercy. At one point, as the machine beeped and the monitor displayed numbers I didn't understand, all I could whisper was, "Lord, prepare me for whatever's coming." A kind nurse named Alina took my hand gently, as if to say, "You're not alone." And truly, I wasn't. God was already there long before the news came, because sometimes heaven moves in silence before the world crashes down in noise. And it was in the quiet of that cold room that Dr. Brooks returned, looked me straight in the eye, and told us something that would completely shake our world. Dr. Brooks took a deep breath before he spoke. I knew something hard was coming. Seasoned doctors only pause like that when the news is heavy. He explained that they had found something in June's test results, a rare, aggressive, fast-progressing condition. The words coming out of his mouth sounded like a foreign language. Mitochondrial dysfunction, neuromuscular system, critical levels. But what my heart understood was this: she's seriously ill. In that moment, everything started to spin. I looked at June lying on the hospital bed, so innocent with no idea what was happening around her. My worst fear had taken shape, the feeling of helplessness. As her mother, I'd always found a way to protect her. But now, how do you fight something you can't even see? My knees gave out, and if Daniel hadn't been beside me, I think I would have collapsed right there. They moved us to a more restricted wing with more advanced machines and a specialized medical team. You could see it in their faces. They knew this case was serious, something that didn't follow the usual rules. They gave us a treatment plan, and along with it came the statistics. I hated every number they showed me. I didn't want percentages. I wanted promises. I wanted miracles. And that's when my faith began to be tested. It's funny how we think we have faith until the moment we're asked to walk on water. I'd always been steady at church, faithful in prayer, active in every spiritual campaign. But now I was in the middle of a stormy sea and I didn't know how to swim. And when you feel like you're about to sink, that's when heaven begins to test what you're really made of. It's not easy to admit, but my faith wavered, and it wasn't just a little stumble. It was like collapsing to my knees on rough ground, too weak to stand back up. I prayed, but it felt like my words hit the ceiling and bounced right back. I read the Bible, but every verse felt distant, like it wasn't written for me. And honestly, that hurt even more than the diagnosis, because I had always believed that even in pain, God speaks. But now, He was silent. I spent countless sleepless nights sitting next to June's hospital bed, staring at the tubes and monitors, asking God why. I wasn't expecting clear answers, I just wanted to feel something, peace, a sign, some kind of comfort. But it didn't come. The hardest part wasn't the uncertainty, it was the fear that I had lost His presence. And let me tell you, when your soul starts missing God, nothing else can fill that void. Not even the kind hugs from people trying to encourage you in the hospital hallway. There were moments I cried alone in the bathroom because I didn't want Daniel to see how shattered I really was. The woman of faith he once knew had become someone barely holding on. And I kept wondering, is God punishing me? Did I fail Him somehow? I'd heard people say that God never leaves us. We're the ones who drift away. But honestly, in that season, all I could feel was darkness, like I was walking through the valley of the shadow, without a rod, without direction, without breath. But it was right there, in my weakness, that something began to move, even if I couldn't see it yet. Because sometimes we have to lose our footing to realize that God is still steady, even when we are not. And when Daniel took my hand during one of those long, quiet night shifts and whispered, "Let's pray anyway," I knew his faith would be the anchor holding me steady until I could find my way back to mine. Daniel always had a calm kind of faith, different from mine. While I wrestled with anxiety and silence, he stood steady, like a tree rooted in the middle of a storm. And his faith wasn't loud. It showed up in the little things. Making my coffee when I forgot to eat, reading Psalm 91 to me every night, reminding me that God's promises still stood. Sometimes God doesn't send answers through words, He sends them through people. And Daniel was that answer. He was the one who gathered our family into a prayer circle, right there in June's hospital room. The smell of antiseptic still lingered in the air, but in that moment, the space became an altar. He prayed with authority, but with tenderness. He complained less and cried out more. I felt weak, but when I saw him laying hands on our daughter's head, something inside me started to stir. It was like his faith was lending strength to mine, and in that moment, I began to breathe differently. Faith united us in a new way. The pain could have pulled us apart, like it does for so many couples, but instead, it brought us closer. We started fasting together, nothing big at first, just skipping one meal a day, and use that time to pray, talk, and speak God's promises out loud. The Bible stopped being just a book we read and became a weapon of war. Daniel taped verses to the window in June's room, and even in her weakness, she would ask to hear Isaiah 41, verse 10, before falling asleep. That became our new routine. Despair still knocked at the door, but we didn't open it anymore. And you know why? Because when faith becomes a joint decision, hell trembles. We didn't have the victory in our hands yet, but we started declaring it like we did. And that's when something deeper began to shift. Not just inside our home, but in the hearts of others around us too. When you realize you're no longer in control, all you can do is fall to your knees. And that's exactly what I did, sometimes in the hospital bathroom, sometimes in the parking lot, sometimes with nothing but a sigh. I began fasting, not as a ritual, but as an act of surrender. It felt like every meal I gave up was a way of telling God, I trust you more than the food that keeps me going. Little by little, fasting became fuel for my exhausted soul. My friend Brielle, a woman of prayer and quiet faith, showed up one day out of the blue and said, "I felt like I needed to come." And she stayed. She didn't bring solutions, she brought presence. She carried little pieces of paper with handwritten Bible verses and a small jar of anointing oil that somehow felt more powerful than any medication. We prayed together in the hallway, even with nurses giving us strange looks. But you know what? Right there, through tears and intercession, the atmosphere would shift. Those were intense days. I spent nights reading the book of Job and crying like every chapter was a reflection of my pain. I clung to the Psalms, especially Psalm 34, verse 18. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted." I started putting together a notebook full of promises, and every time fear tried to creep in, I'd read those verses like they were handwritten letters from heaven. That's what kept me from falling apart completely. It was in that season of deep surrender that I started to notice something invisible moving. Nothing had changed physically in June yet, but spiritually, something was shifting. Faith was no longer just an idea, it had become survival. And little did I know, while I was fasting in the room next door, a woman of prayer would have a dream that would completely change the course of our story. It was a hot, stuffy morning when Sister Clarice showed up at the hospital with her worn-out Bible tucked under her arm. An elderly woman, almost 80, she walked slowly, but her spirit lit up the whole place. When she saw me, she didn't say hello or ask how I was doing. She just looked me in the eyes and said, "The Lord gave me a dream about your daughter last night." I froze. No one had told her anything. We sat on a bench in the hospital garden. She held my hand and began describing the dream in detail. June was surrounded by light and a crowd of angels were singing. She said she saw a flame in my daughter's heart and heard a voice from heaven declare, "This is not the end." I felt chills all over my body. That wasn't made up. That was an answer. It was God breaking the silence that had been tormenting me for so long. Sister Clarice wasn't someone who exaggerated. She didn't say much, but her words carried deep spiritual authority. Before she left, she handed me a small, yellowed piece of paper with a verse written on it. Habakkuk 1, verse 5. "I am going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told." I tucked that paper into my pocket like it was a treasure map. For the first time in weeks, my heart beat with real hope. I walked back into June's hospital room with tears in my eyes and a lighter soul. Something inside me had shifted. And even though nothing had changed on the monitors, I started preparing for a miracle. Because when God speaks, even if reality says otherwise, it's time to align your spirit. And that's when, right then, the doctors walked in with the news that would throw us into the deepest valley of our journey so far. The moment no parent ever wants to face came with just a few words and a look of sorrow. Dr. Brooks walked into the room with his team and, with as much dignity as he could, said, "We've done everything medicine allows." It felt like hearing a sentence quietly spoken out loud. The air left my lungs, and for a moment, the world around me went completely silent. Daniel squeezed my hand, but even that couldn't stop the tears from falling, right there, in front of everyone. I couldn't understand how everything was ending like this. It felt like the script of my life had just been ripped out of my hands. The doctor tried to explain that June's body wasn't responding anymore, that her vitals were dropping, that maybe it was time to accept it. But when you love someone, you don't accept that easily. I heard the words, but inside I was screaming, "What about Sister Clarice's dream? What about the promises? What about God?" The battle now was between what I saw and what I believed. We were left alone in the room for a few minutes. Daniel stared at the floor in silence, trying to be strong for me and for our daughter who couldn't respond anymore. That's when I realized grief doesn't begin with death. It starts in the heart while there's still a heartbeat, but no human hope. Nurse Alina walked in slowly, holding back tears, like someone who's witnessed the scene more times than she'd care to admit. And then she left us, so we could have our moment. But something inside me refused to let this story end like that. This couldn't be the end. It couldn't be all there was. There was something in my spirit still moving, still pulsing, still resisting. And that same day, with machines beeping and our hearts breaking, I would pray the rawest, most honest, most desperate prayer of my entire life. I walked out of the room carrying what felt like the weight of the world on my shoulders. I dragged myself to the end of the hallway and, without thinking, just collapsed onto the floor. I didn't care if anyone saw me. In that moment, it was just me and God. On my knees, with my face pressed against the cold tile, I cried like I had never cried before. It wasn't a beautiful or well-structured prayer. It was just raw pain poured out through sobs. Lord, if you can still hear me, speak to me now. Those were the only clear words I could get out. The rest was just groaning. I didn't ask for healing. I didn't beg for answers. I just asked for his presence. This was more than desperation. It was surrender. For the first time, I didn't try to control my faith or hide my fear. I simply let go of everything. Because when a soul lays itself bare before God, he never turns it away. The hospital walls were still cold. The monitors kept beeping steadily, but inside me, something began to break. Or maybe the better word is, something began to be rebuilt. I remembered Romans 8, verse 26. The Spirit intercedes for us with groans that words cannot express. That's exactly what I felt. Like heaven was translating my pain into words I didn't know how to say. Right there, on the floor, God started lifting me, from the inside out. I stayed there for a long time, maybe hours, and when I finally stood up, I didn't walk away with an answer, but I carried something even stronger, the certainty that I wasn't alone. And in those early morning hours, when I walked back into June's room with swollen eyes and bruised knees, still unsure of what was coming next, that's when the unexpected began to unfold. The middle of the night came with that strange kind of silence that only hospitals have. Dark hallways, the bluish glow of monitors, and the mechanical sound of breathing filled the room with a noise that gave me chills. I had dozed off with my head down, sitting next to June's bed, when I heard a different kind of beep. It was subtle, but unmistakable. One of the machines was picking something up, something that hadn't happened in days. I jumped to my feet and went straight to the monitor. Her heart rate was rising, slowly, steadily. Not a sudden spike, but a quiet climb. I called the nurse, Alina, who immediately noticed the change too. She adjusted the wires, double-checked the data, then called in another nurse. Before long, 3 medical professionals were in the room, trying to figure out what was going on. The atmosphere, which had felt like a long goodbye, started to shift into confusion. What struck me most was the look on Alina's face. She stared at June like she was seeing something beyond what human eyes could make sense of. "This isn't normal," she whispered, as she watched the numbers move. It's like her body just got a new command. That sent a chill through my whole body. I didn't dare say anything yet, but I knew God was doing something, quietly, mysteriously, beyond our understanding. There was no lightning in the sky, no visible angel, no audible voice, but there was a presence in that room, strong, real, tangible. And before the doctors even got the update, something bigger than science had already begun. Without knowing it, Alina was about to witness something no medical protocol could ever predict. The next morning, June's room felt more like a command center. Doctors were going in and out, clipboards in hand, whispering to each other, all with the same look on their faces: disbelief. Dr. Brooks, the one who had given us the hardest news the day before, now stared at the reports with furrowed brows and a clenched jaw, as if trying to find a mistake in the data. But there was no mistake. June's vital signs were improving, without any intervention. That's when the team called in Dr. Rachel Simmons, a specialist in rare diseases, to review the entire case. She spent hours going over old and current test results. Her conclusion? Inconclusive. Nothing in June's medical history explained such a sudden change. No new medications had been given, no new procedures done. "This goes against everything we know in medicine," she said, unable to hide the mix of awe and unease in her voice. I just stood back and watched. I didn't need to raise my hand or preach a sermon. God was already doing that through the data in her medical chart. It's funny how, when heaven moves, even skepticism has to pause and pay attention. Dr. Brooks came back to our room later and, with a kind of beautiful honesty, said, "I'm a man of science, but what happened here, I can't explain." To me, that was a living Bible verse, a testimony without a microphone. And while the specialists were still trying to find scientific words to label what had happened, I already knew the names since the early hours of that morning. Miracle. And the most amazing part? We hadn't seen it all yet, because what Alina witnessed that night went far beyond anything numbers on a screen could ever capture. It was 2 days later, during a shift change, that I met Nurse Grace. She walked into the room with a look that caught me off guard. Not clinical or technical, but something deeper, spiritual, like she already knew something no one else did. After checking June's vitals and straightening the sheets, she came over to me and said, "Can I tell you what I saw that night?" I just nodded, already feeling my heart start to race. Grace said that around 3 a.m., she came in to check the monitors. The lights were dim and everything was quiet, but as she opened the door, she froze. There was a presence in the room, a soft light hovering around your daughter, and for a few seconds, it looked like someone was sitting by her bed. She paused, took a deep breath, and continued. "I didn't see a face, but I felt such a deep peace, I had to step out for a moment so I wouldn't cry." That gave me chills from head to toe. It wasn't the first time someone had mentioned something invisible showing up in that room. And it wasn't just suggestion. Grace had no idea about Sister Clarice's dream or the prayers spoken there. But everything was lining up like pieces of a spiritual puzzle. I knew God was allowing ordinary people to witness the supernatural, so no one could brush it off as coincidence. Before leaving, Grace held my hand and said, "If anyone still doubts, let them look at what's happening here. This isn't just recovery, it's rebirth." And little did we know, the real testimony was still coming, straight from June's own mouth, in words no adult could have planted or made up. The morning June finally opened her eyes, time seemed to stand still. I was dozing off with my head resting on the edge of her bed when I heard a faint little whisper, "Mommy?" My whole body froze. I slowly opened my eyes, scared that maybe I had imagined it, but there she was, eyes open, peaceful expression, like she had just woken up from a deep, long sleep. I grabbed her hand and cried, like someone finding a missing piece of their soul. But what she said next completely undid me. With her voice still weak, June looked up at the ceiling and softly said, "He was here with me, sitting right there. He called me by my name." My heart was racing. I asked, "Who, baby?" And she answered, "A man with eyes full of light. He said he'd stay with me until I got better." Hearing that, it was impossible not to feel the presence of God flooding that room. June didn't know anything about the prayers, the dreams, or what had happened during the night. She'd been unconscious for days. But everything she said matched, point by point, what different people had already seen or felt. I knew in that moment, those weren't just the words of a child. They were a message from heaven, wrapped in the pure innocence of someone who hasn't yet learned how to doubt. And those words touched something in me I didn't even know was there. She ended by saying, "Mommy, he told me I have a mission and that I'm going to sing to many people about his love." Her words took me right back to the praise songs she used to sing alone in her room before she got sick. But now they carried a different weight, a new anointing. And in that moment, I understood. God wasn't just healing her. He was raising up a living witness of the impossible. After that awakening, June's recovery was nothing short of unbelievable. Every day brought a new improvement. Her heart rate stabilized, her test results started coming back normal, and the doctors went from skeptical to amazed. Dr. Simmons told me, "It's like her body suddenly chose to come back to life with a strength we can't explain." But I knew it wasn't just her body deciding, it was heaven stepping in. It was faith bringing the impossible back to life. June started smiling again, started playing again. She asked for worship songs on my phone and sang with a voice still weak, but filled with anointing. Even the nurses would stop at the door to listen. That room, once marked by pain, had become a place of worship. Daniel would hold her tiny hands and cry quietly. And me? Well, all I could do was give thanks, because not a single prayer, not one fast, not one tear had been in vain. God had heard every single cry. Soon, people started coming to the hospital just to see the miracle girl. Doctors who didn't believe in anything began asking different kinds of questions. One of them asked me, "Did you do anything besides the treatment?" And I answered without hesitation, "Yes, we prayed." He stood in silence. Maybe he didn't understand it all, but he felt it. Because when the impossible happens right before your eyes, even those who don't believe are forced to stop and think. On the 10th day, June got out of bed, walked to the window, and said, "God gave me another chance, Mommy." That moment marked my soul. The faith we held onto was tested to its very limit, and it won. And now, back at home, watching my daughter run through the backyard like nothing ever happened, I understand. What God did wasn't just for us. It was meant to inspire so many others. Today, when I see June running around the house, singing worship songs or asking questions about Jesus, my heart overflows. It's more than just joy. It's a quiet reverence for everything we've been through. Because she's not here by luck or coincidence. She's here because God chose to step in. And every time she smiles, I see the visible and undeniable reflection of God's grace shining through her. We've been sharing this testimony everywhere God leads us. It started with a church service, then a prayer live stream, and soon the invitations started coming. People cry, get emotional, and find strength, not because we're special, but because what happened with June reveals a God who still hears, still answers, and still moves. Sometimes I get messages from desperate moms, and I can look them in the eye and say, "Don't give up. I know exactly what you're going through." Even June wants to tell her story someday. She's already practicing through drawings, songs, and simple words that deeply touch anyone who listens. And as her mother, I just pray she never forgets the one who lifted her up. This miracle wasn't just physical healing. It was a spiritual rebirth for our entire home. We changed our routines, the way we pray, the way we love. The suffering shaped us, but it was the miracle that raised us up. And if you've listened to all of this so far, I want to tell you, it doesn't matter what the doctor said or what reality keeps showing you. God still has the final word. And sometimes He writes the greatest plot twists, right when we think the chapter is over. June's story proves it. After everything you just heard, tell me, what's still holding you back from believing that God can turn the page in your story? Is it fear? The weight that already feels too long? Or maybe, deep down, you've stopped praying because it feels like it's no longer worth it. I'm not here to convince you with arguments. I just shared what I lived. And if God did this for me, an ordinary woman, full of flaws, He can do it for you too. Maybe today your daughter is a different kind of dream. It could be a marriage hanging by a thread, a lost hope, a forgotten purpose? And if it is, are you willing to kneel again? To cry for real? To pray even when it feels like no one is listening? Because miracles don't happen where there's control, but where there's surrender. And it was only when I gave in, body, soul, and spirit, that heaven finally answered, "Now it's your turn. This doesn't end here. Go back to praying with faith, even if your voice shakes. Name your promises, fast, write down your prayers, declare Bible verses. Live like someone who believes even before seeing it happen. Because God isn't limited by what your eyes see or what the reports say. He still walks into silent rooms and turns funerals into new beginnings." And if this story spoke to your heart, leave a comment below. What would you like God to resurrect in your life? I'll pray with you, because your miracle can also begin with a simple act of surrender.